Well, a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in this beautiful planet of ours. And welcome to Take Charge of Your Health Naturally podcast and recording interview. So, I am feeling so blessed and honored today to have our guest, Petrea King. Now, I've tried to work out when I first met Petrea, but I can't exactly remember. But most of you know my speciality in terms of my clinic work is lymphatic drainage. And my dear friend Anna and I, we volunteered at a retreat she was doing for women recovering from breast cancer. And that was my first interaction with Petrea. But since then, things have gone from a small beginning to a really massive explosion of influence that Petrea has. And I hesitate to say, this book of Petrea's, I read however many 15 years ago, and I'm rereading it now, and I'm thoroughly enjoying rereading it again. So if anybody wants Petrea's book, you just need to see the details posted in the comment. So Petrea, a very warm welcome to you.
It's lovely to be with you, Margie. Thank you for the opportunity.
So for those of you who don't know Petrea, a lot of people do know her. I'm just going to share with you just a little bit about her. Petrea is a naturopath. She's a meditation teacher. As you know, she's an author. And she is the founder of Quest for Life. She'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through the interview. Petrea has worked with tens of thousands of people living on the edge of life, the edge of despair, anguish, grief. And Petrea herself has had an unexpected recovery from leukemia. So she's coming from a place of serious experience. As a naturopath and herbalist, Quest for Life Center is in Bandanoon, which she established in 1998. The center hosts 34 5-day residential programs, along with 100 workshops in rural, regional, and remote Australia every year. So the work that Petrea does is absolutely incredible. Petrea, may I ask you, how did you get started on this journey?
Well, really, it started a very, very long time ago. Even as a child, I was always preoccupied with, why are we here? What's the purpose of human existence? How do you know that you've lived the life that you came here to live? And also, I had a lot of surgery on my legs when I was a teenager. I had 3 years in hospital, and that left me with quite crippling arthritis. So I studied naturopathy really for my own benefit, just to see what I could do to help myself, because I used to walk with walking sticks when I was 20, 21. And I'd also found meditation when I was about 17. So that means about 54 years of practice. And those two things, naturopathy, understanding the power of the body to heal itself when given the right environment, and also our ability to manage our brain more effectively through techniques of meditation and mindfulness, has really informed everything that I've ever done ever since. I suppose it was really my diagnosis of leukemia and being told that I had 3 months to live that really stopped me in my tracks. And that's what caused me to really put all of this into practice in a much more felt way. I knew a lot of this in theory, but it wasn't my lived experience. So the philosophy of yoga and meditation and the principles of naturopathy, I certainly abided as well as I could with those, but it hadn't become a lived experience. Like a lot of people, I lived behind a facade that was highly polished, that I kept up for the world, saying, I'm fine. And that was really a way to deflect people's attention away from the blithering emotional wreck that I was inside.
So, Petrea, if I was to say to you, why is it so important for people who are going through these kind of traumas? Why is it important that they seek help like you can offer?
Well, I think it can be a very lonesome journey when you're suddenly propelled into the caverns of your own anguish or grief, or the diagnosis of a serious illness, or some unfolding nightmare in your life, that can be a very lonesome experience, because oftentimes people want to fix it or change it or make it better. And sometimes these things you cannot fix, you cannot change, you cannot make it better, but you can show up, you can be present and hear another person's anguish and hopefully help them to find their own best answer. Obviously, my best answer is not going to be helpful because that's for me. And what we do at Quest is really help people to find their next step, their best answer, so that they can incorporate that in their life in a way that's really meaningful for them.
And Petrea, working with, I would say, maybe broken or fragile people who've been through trauma, how do you keep yourself inspired to keep moving on in this area that is uncertain?
Well, I think when you're propelled into your own suffering, whether that's grief or confrontation with your mortality or some unfolding nightmare in your life, that is often a lonesome place for people to be. And I know that my job is not to fix it or change it or make it better, because that's that person's role, not mine. But I definitely practice what I would encourage others to do, which is to take really good care of my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, so that I can be present to people's anguish in a way that actually helps them to find their own best answer. Oftentimes, when you're newly diagnosed, people want to trot out what someone did who didn't die of their disease, or they bring out a story to try and sound like they know what it's like to be in your position. But oftentimes that's not particularly helpful. And I think a deep listening heart is really valuable for people when they're suffering. And for me, I find these people an inspiration because they refuse to be defined by the appalling things that have happened to them. And I think that's just amazing. And I know that I've done that in my own life, and I would often say to people, you stay feeling as miserable, depressed, stuck, angry, ungrateful for as long as you need to, because what happened to you is terrible. But they know, like I know, that that's not actually going to change anything. And the fact is, this is planet Earth. This is where suffering happens. If you didn't want suffering, wrong planet, because this is where it all happens. And so when suffering does happen, we need to be able to listen to one another, to hear deeply from one another, and then to walk together towards a person's individual solution.
I love that word you said, hear deeply.
It's rare, isn't it, to be heard deeply, because
Yes.
so often people are rehearsing what they want to say while you're talking, and they're not really listening to you at all. So, yes, that's a very rare commodity.
Would you like to maybe just clarify a little bit more about hearing deeply for all of us, not only those who are in the situation? How is it good to practice hearing deeply?
When I first started this work almost 40 years ago now, I used to almost panic when I was conducting, a support group, when someone would tell me some anguish-filled story, and I would feel, oh, I want to fix this. I want to make it better for this person, and I really had to sit with my own discomfort around feeling helpless in the presence of someone's anguish, to feel powerless to change what's happening to another person, and to be comfortable with that discomfort within myself. And now I really trust that people do have their own best answer. And with that generous listening that we can offer to one another, it creates the opportunity for a person both to articulate, perhaps to utter the unutterable, and have it witnessed and heard. And then it's no longer a private suffering that's going around and around in that person's mind, but it's a shared suffering. And oftentimes when people feel deeply listened to, they feel this person gets me, then they come up with their next best solution, which is always amazing to me. And certainly we provide education, we provide skills, we provide strategies, but it's very much with the understanding that we're going to lay all of this education and these opportunities out on the smorgasbord, as it were. And then it's up to each individual to pick and choose from that smorgasbord what might be appropriate for them now. And we can't know that for other people, but we are very steeped in understanding neuroscience and the human condition, really, where sometimes unthinkable, unimaginable, unexpected things happen. And I guess I've been very fortunate because I've had a lot of those myself in my own life. And it's made me more familiar with that territory of when the unexpected happens in your life and it just comes out of left field and you have to learn how to deal with it as skillfully as you can.
And Petrea, I want to just pick up on something you just mentioned earlier, and now you've also just mentioned that neuroscience. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the functions of the brain and how that has moved forward?
Well, it's changed dramatically, of course, over the last 4 decades. And now we understand that, there are these two systems in the brain. There's the default mode system, which is really laid down in the early part of our life. That's where we get the I'll be happy when story. It's the unconscious. It's the little chatterbox in people's heads that gives them a running commentary on themselves, on other people, on life. And it tends to be reinforced over time due to our peers, due to life experiences. So we may grow up with some beliefs about ourselves, beliefs like I'm responsible for everyone and everything. It might be my value doesn't lie in who I am, it lies in what I do. And of course, if you have that belief, then of course you've got to be doing all the time to validate your existence. But some of us also have ones that might make us feel that we're responsible for everybody else's unhappiness and that it's somehow our fault and that we need to do something about it. Or we might have a belief that we're the peacemaker or we're the happy one or we're the skillful one, the one that everyone turns to in the family, the linchpin. And some of these attitudes that we can grow up with where they may have developed in the very earliest part of our life, often before we're 3. And
wow.
we might become the responsible one, the peacemaker, the athletic one, the bright one, the funny one, the sickly one, the responsible one. So we take on this particular persona that works within the dynamics of our own particular family, and it becomes second nature to us to see the world that way. And we set off on that journey in life believing that I'll be happy when I've got the stuff of life, whatever it is that I've been programmed or convinced will bring me happiness, the relationships, the accolades, the qualifications, the possessions, whether it's power or sex or money or whatever it is that we believe will bring us happiness. And then most of us bump into what we call at Quest one of the Ds in life. And a D might be a disappointment, a drama, a disaster, a diagnosis, a death, a divorce, a despair, a disloyalty, a disagreement, a dementia, a dad, a daughter, there's lots of them, a despair, debt, a drought, a downpour. And when you bump into that D, everything that's second nature to you doesn't work. It might be second nature to you to blame other people for your unhappiness. It might be second nature to blame yourself for your own unhappiness. It might be second nature to you to not eat or overeat or not sleep or sleep all the time or drown your sorrows or drug yourself. But this D demands more from you than you've ever had to draw on up until now. And you get to that fabulous place where you say, that's it. Something has to change, and it's me. I can't change the D. The only thing I can change, but it's a very powerful point of power, the only thing I can change is how I choose to see that suffering, whatever it might be, and how I now choose to respond to that. And the good news is that there's another part of the brain, which is our executive functioning brain, the neocortex. And that's where it's also called the task positive network. And when we engage the TPN and move out of the DMN, the default mode network, then we're in the present moment. Then we have access to some wonderful qualities: insight, intuition, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, compassion. Those are the qualities of our essential nature, not what's become second nature to us. It's interesting we call it second nature, because you'll often hear people say, oh, it's second nature for me to think like this, feel like this, react like this. And no one ever questions, well, what's your first nature? What was there before you took on those limitations, those beliefs, those ideas about yourself, about others, about life? And it's often suffering that gets us to the place where we're willing to see things differently. And that's when we can make that return journey back home to our essential nature, rather than staying stuck in what has become second nature to us. So those two systems can't work at the same time. Either one is in operation, the default, or the task positive. And so we often talk to people about come to your senses, because we say that to people when they're anxious or having a panic attack, because we know that the body is always in the present moment. It's never in the future. It's never in the past. And when you think about what are the activities that bring you into the present moment, if you're a surfer, if you're a golfer, if you're a swimmer, if you love being in nature, if you love bushwalking, those are activities that bring us into the present moment. That's why we love them. And it's also when we have access to insight, intuition, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, and compassion. So really, I think meditation and mindfulness help us to engage that executive functioning brain and keep it engaged. So we often talk to our participants, and indeed practice throughout the week, just come to our senses. Bottom on the seat, feet on the floor, touch of our clothing, air against the skin. Perhaps there's a taste in the mouth, an aroma in the air, what falls within your gaze, and all the sounds nearby, and let your listening run right out till you hear the sky. You see, it's impossible to have a fully fledged panic and do that at the same time. And the more we do that, the more we train ourselves to have access to the TPN, the task positive network, all of the time.
Wow, that is such a beautiful explanation. You are the epitome of that. Absolutely, you are. Following on from that, I think our listener would love to hear just a little bit about Quest for Life. That would be so helpful.
Well, I started the Quest for Life Foundation in 1989 really to further my work. And because of my recent experience with leukemia, I mostly in the 80s worked with people with life-threatening illnesses. And I often used to move in if it was a young mum who was dying at home or a child who was dying at home. I often moved in just to be in the background and make sure that everything that needed to be said and done was taken care of. But then, of course, all of those people had stories about domestic violence, which I'd experienced, growing up with mental illness, which I'd experienced with my brother, who told me before we were 10 that he knew he had to kill himself by the time he was 30. And so I grew up with this terrible dread, but also responsibility that that's the purpose of my life. I'm here to make sure that he doesn't do that. You know, they talked about chronic pain, which I'd experienced. And so many of their stories, not that we ever know what it's like for another human being. It's never helpful to say, I know exactly how you feel. We don't know how another person feels. But because I experienced my own despair, my own anguish, my own confrontation with mortality, with profound and complicated grief, because I felt guilty that I'd failed my brother, I'd failed the family, I'd failed myself. So because I've been in those places in myself, places of abandonment, of betrayal, it made me a better companion to be with other people who might be new to the territory. And so while my work started off really with people mostly with life-threatening illnesses, now it's morphed more into the human condition in every way. So our programs at present, we have different programs. We have one for people with post-traumatic stress injuries. So we see a lot of police and domestic violence and people who've experienced sexual abuse or sexual assault or victims of crime or motor vehicle accidents. So where they've gone through either one major traumatic event or indeed through their profession, they've had a long history of traumatic events. We have another program, Healing Your Life, which is for people dealing, they might just be at a crossroads in their life after a relationship breakdown, or maybe after grief or loss, or they may be dealing with depression or anxiety. And then we still have Quest for Life, which is for people dealing with physical illnesses. So people with cancer, Parkinson's, motor neuron disease, MS, and so on. So people whose lives have really been stopped because of some physical illness. And then we have another one, which is Maintaining Your Memory, which is about aging in a healthy way so that we maintain our memory, focus, concentration, our sense of humour, and our ability to continue contributing to life.
What you're offering is that smorgasbord is huge. There's so much for everybody. And as we know, we are living in rather unusual times, if I can put it that way. So there are outside stresses on us that maybe 10 or 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have that as we have today. So what I would actually like to appeal to any listeners before COVID, if I might say, Petrea was going to expand this beautiful establishment in Bundanoon. And she had the quote from the builders. And then COVID happened. And they had raised enough money to take on the building project to expand. And I'll let Petrea tell you why she wants to expand the project. But since COVID happened, it shot the budget completely out the water. So we are on a fundraising campaign. We need to help Petrea raise enough funds so that that building expansion can take place. Petrea, please explain a little bit more about that.
Yes, thank you, Margie. You know, as I said, we run 34 5-day programs at the moment. And we also do 100 workshops out in the community, often after fires and floods and so on. And what we found is that people with post-traumatic stress injuries, so people who've had some, really substantial singular trauma or a lifetime of trauma, in 5 days, they really understand neuroplasticity and epigenetics. They understand how the brain works, how the brain and nervous system is impacted by trauma, and how the environment around the cell can be changed through sleep and exercise and nutrition and the chemistry of our emotions, the chemicals that are in the environment. But then after 5 days, they often go home to isolated or unsupportive environments. And we want them to be able to stay here at Quest. We have this beautiful 9-acre property in Bundanoon. So we want them to stay here for 3 weeks. So to do the program and then to put that program into practice over the following 2 weeks. Now, our results already are so extraordinary. They're unmatched by any other service that we've found anywhere, frankly, in the world. So even in 5 days, people benefit enormously. And I'm convinced that in 3 weeks, people will completely heal from their trauma, or they'll be so far down the track that they know exactly what they need to do to continue that healing process. So our accommodation here is already fully utilised. So we need another 24 accommodation rooms and the infrastructure so that these people can be here in a supportive program for that 3 weeks. Part of that will be actually working in the gardens growing food, because a lot of people with post-traumatic stress injuries are also not eating so well. And of course, when you feel pretty crappy, you tend to eat pretty crappy too. And so we know that nutrition is so important to people's well-being and their ability to heal. And so actually growing and preparing, being part of the preparation of their own food, because they've been so dysregulated, is very much a part of this program as well, along with, exercise and weekly counselling and support in all of the revisiting the program and really implementing that on a daily basis. So that's our project now. But as you say, costs increased dramatically over the last 3 years. So we need to raise another $4 million before we're now
$4
in a
million.
position.
So that's the target, another $4 million to get the rest of the
Yes.
project underway.
Yes, we've got an approved DA. We're all set to go. And we were all set to start this project when COVID happened. So that's put a slight pause on it, but I know it's enormously needed at the moment.
Petrea, I have all your contact details. What is the best way for someone who would like to become involved and be of some assistance financially or another way? Which is the best contact?
But they can always go to the website. There's a lot more information there at questforlife.org.au. And they're welcome to be in touch with me directly, Petrea, which is Petrea, at questforlife.org.au. And I'd always be very happy to talk to anyone, of course.
Well, I tell you, I hope that there's an enormous response that can move this project forward in another way. Just in closing, Petrea, is there a tip you'd like to give to any listeners who have felt this message is really for them? What tip would you give them?
Well, I think, Margie, as you've said, the last 3 years have been very challenging for many, many people. Some people have lost their job, lost their business, lost family members in very unhappy circumstances where they perhaps couldn't even visit, couldn't hold a hand, couldn't stroke a brow. So we know these last 3 years have been particularly difficult for people. And I don't think we're through the turbulence that we're likely to experience in the coming months and years as well. So I would encourage everyone to fasten their seatbelt. And your seatbelt really is the sure knowledge of how to care for yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And then to divvy up your 168 hours that you get every week. We checked it out internationally. Everybody gets 168 hours, and you need to divvy those up so that you replenish yourself first. Before the dog, before your partner, before the kids, you need to replenish yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And then once you've filled up your own inner bucket, you're only ever giving from the overflow. If you're always running around giving out from a half-empty bucket, you're likely to get either resentful or exhausted. And of course, the only place you see this promoted is on planes, where they say, when the mask comes down, first put the mask on you, and when you're breathing normally, put it on the kids, put it on the other passengers. But so often we're running around putting masks on everyone else, and we haven't even attended to ourselves. So personally, I love roller coasters. I'm up in the front caboose, but there's no way I'd get on a roller coaster without a seatbelt. And right now we are on the roller coaster, and we need a really good seatbelt to make sure that we can make this journey in the very best possible way and without losing our sense of self and our ability to contribute at this time.
That is so awesome, Petrea. That is so powerful what you've just said. I hope everybody just grasps that message. Thank you so much.
That's a real pleasure,
just
Margie.
one more thing. I know, Petrea, you said there are a couple of freebies that any of our listeners who would like, and that's on your website. Is that correct?
No, but it could be. I'll arrange for that. So it's really to look at the symptoms of stress and what helps. And it's a long list of all of the behaviours that we've found in people when they're at the end of their tether. They drink too much, they drug too much, they don't sleep, they sleep all the time, they abuse alcohol, they get intolerant, impatient, all of those things. So I'd suggest write up your half dozen favourite ways of manifesting stress so you know that about yourself. And then there's another list of all the things that people say help them to reconnect with themselves, to feel at peace with themselves. Being in nature, listening to music, ritual, prayer, yoga, dancing, singing, candlelight, all sorts of things. And when you look at those two lists, one of them is the symptoms of not being present when you've got too much on your plate. And the other one are all the activities that actually bring us into the present moment. So you want to know your half dozen favourite ways of replenishing yourself, your half dozen favourite ways of manifesting stress, so that you can have those lists up on your bathroom mirror or wherever, and just check that you're definitely doing the things that you know replenish you on a daily basis or a weekly basis, if it's a massage or whatever it might be.
Petrea, it's been such an honor to have you on Take Charge of Your Health Naturally. I know that all of us listeners will have benefited enormously, and I look forward to being in touch with you again very soon. So, from myself and from you, Petrea, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margie, for the wonderful opportunity to talk to you.